Hi there. Hopefully this will work out okay. There's a lot of thunder going around, so suddenly I disappear. Well, you'll never know because I'll go back and replay this. But anyway, so you may hear a clap of thunder. Just be aware of that if you hear something strange. Okay, I've got a quote today that came from Mel Robbins, which made me stop to think, and I want to take it and sort of go beyond it. So my suggestion is when you see or hear the quote at the beginning, just go with me because I'm probably going to say something that you're not going to expect. At least, I don't think you will. Whether I'm off on that, okay? All right, so the quote is give other people the freedom to think negative thoughts about you. Give other people the freedom to think negative thoughts about you. Now, unless I'm totally off on this, there are going to be a few of you that are going to pause, laugh, or roll your eyes or say something and say something to the effect of, they're going to think about that no matter what I do, or some variation on theme. Think about what you just said. They're going to think negative thoughts about you no matter what you do, or even if you give them permission to think negative thoughts. If you don't give them permission to think negative thoughts, they're still going to think negative thoughts. So, in other words, if you think about it, what you're basically acknowledging is they're going to think negative thoughts about you anyway. Is this true or is this not true? Odds are you're going to say that, yeah, it's true. They're going to think negative thoughts about you no matter what you do, right? So far, so good. Agree with me? Now, the next point then. So why do you spend so much time trying to please them? Because if you spend a lot of time saying, oh, if I do this, they're not going to like it, or if I don't do this, they're not going to like it, or I need to do this because it's there. Why? If they're going to think negative thoughts about you anyway, then why do you have to go through jumping through hoops to make sure that they don't? Because it's not going to work. Well, think about this seriously. Because when I gave you that quote and I said basically what you're trying to do is give them permission to do that. And again, as I said, I could be wrong on this, but I'd be willing to bet that most likely you said something to the effect or had the thought of that they were going to think negative thoughts about you anyway. Again, you said that, or that came through your head. So then why do you have to sort of bend yourself over backwards to try to stop them doing what they're going to do anyway? Okay? Think about this. So then therefore, the thought then therefore becomes that you should go ahead and pretty much do what you need to do anyway. Now, granted, if you decide you don't want to run, you want to run the red light or some such thing like, hey, that might be a problem. But under normal circumstances, I suspect that there are a lot of times that you are in a meeting and you don't say anything because you think somebody's not going to like it, or they're going to think you're silly, or you're going to think whatever. Or somebody asks you where you want to go eat or what movie you want to see or some such thing like that, and you don't say anything because you think people are going to laugh. Or you've got some other situation about, whatever, and you don't say anything because you think people are going to think poorly of you. Why bother? Because even if you do say something, yes, somebody's probably going to think something negative, but they're going to think something negative anyway. So they could be thinking something negative just because you don't say something. So let's just look at it from that standpoint. You're in a group, you have the opportunity to make a comment. You don't, because you're afraid that somebody's going to think negatively of you. If the group's large enough, the odds are that there's going to be at least one person there that thinks negatively of you because you didn't. So what are you trying to do? If you're trying to keep people from thinking negative thoughts, but they're going to think them anyway, shouldn't you just basically go ahead and do what you want to do or what you're thinking about doing, or make that comment or say that you like this and that and the other, and not worry about what other people think about you because they're going to think negative thoughts anyway? You follow where I'm coming from? So the question then I have to ask of you is, why should you spend all your time getting worried about what other people are going to think when you really can't do anything about it because some of people aren't going to like certain things anyway. So what are you going to do? Spend okay, I like this group over here. I'm going to try and do something to keep them happy. But if I say something that they like, that this group's not going to like it, and about those people over there aren't going to care. And if you're spending all of your time trying to figure out how to make everybody happy, first of all, that's not going to happen, at least not for a prolonged period of time. The first thing that popped in my mind when I said that is that if you managed to have, like you had a couple of $1 billion and gave everybody $1,000 bill or something like that, yeah, you'd make them happy for a moment. And then somebody'd say, can I have some more? So even though you gave them $1,000, so to speak, at least figuratively speaking, and they were really grateful for like 2 seconds, there's going to be at least somebody that's going to be greedy and says, can I have more? Why didn't you give it to me last week? And they're going to start looking at you from that particular negative standpoint because they're going to be kibitzing about whatever it is that you did and why you didn't do more of it, or when you did it, or how not you did it, and you gave it to him first, and why didn't you give it to me? All of that sort of stuff, right? Am I wrong, ladies and gentlemen? Am I wrong? So if I'm basically right about this, at least statistically speaking, then why should you worry so much about what other people think? Because there is no way you're going to be able to change their minds. You can try to do something and you can try and be persuasive and get somebody else to think about it. So you're in a group, you're trying to, let's just pretend for the sake of argument, you're in a sales meeting and you're trying to persuade somebody to buy something. You might get one or two people to be persuaded and buy it. Maybe not everybody. But even if you manage to get everybody in the meeting, are you going to be able to do that again and again and again and again every time you have a meeting? Probably not. If you do, you should quit and write a book and tell people how to do it. You make $1 million that way. But the odds are somebody's going to dislike what you have to say if you've got something more than, say, 3 or 4 people in any group that you've got. So why spend the time trying to make everybody else happy? It would seem to be much more reasonable for you to start thinking in terms of what is it that I want to do and what is it that I want to think, and say that and get that out and be, in a sense, honest with yourself as well as other people. Because if you think about it, if they ask you your opinion and you say, oh, I don't have any, or I agree with Joe, or whatever it is like that, are you really being honest with you and everybody else? Probably not. And then you get a little stressed because at some point in time, that you're not being honest with yourself. Or if Joe over there has a good idea, or maybe it's not so much of a good idea, but your idea is better, and Joe's idea doesn't pan, but yours would. Are you being fair to everybody, including yourself? Granted, your idea may not work. You may totally bomb it. But sooner or later, you're going to have a good idea. Something's going to work, and something's going to come out to be in your particular favor. Because let's go back to the idea that bombs. Suppose you have an idea that just doesn't work out at all. That doesn't necessarily mean your idea was wrong. There could be other circumstances about that idea that sort of make your idea not work at that particular point in time. Where it come from, I have no clue, but let's talk about the airplane. People have been thinking about manned flight for decades, years, centuries. They tried a variety of different things. It didn't work until we got to the technology that allowed certain things to be able to take advantage of the science of flight. So it wasn't that people's ideas about this were wrong, because I can imagine there are a lot of people that got sort of laughed at because they were thinking, oh, gee, wouldn't it be great if we had a machine that made people fly? People probably laughed at them. People probably laughed at the idea of having a horseless carriage or a box in which you could watch pictures. There's I don't know if you've ever seen it, but when the moving pictures came out, there was an episode I believe in France, and somebody sold tickets and they had this like sheet or something like that in front of a room, and they put this picture on it, which happened to be a picture of a train. And people ended up yelling and screaming and running out of the building because they thought the train was coming through the room. They could see the setup. They knew it was a sheet or something along that line. And yet they screamed because they thought that the train was coming for them. Nowadays, if you had something like that, only really small infants do that until they realize that there's, like 3 dimensions and it doesn't work out because they don't see anybody else screaming. So in other words, it may be that your idea might be a good idea, but the timing for some reason is off, or the circumstances of the technology just won't let it happen. You might need to have certain people or certain situations come together at the same time to make that idea work. So it doesn't mean your idea is lousy, it just may mean that this is not the time for it. Maybe the idea is lousy, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all of your ideas are going to be lousy all the time. Besides which, there's a lot of things, if you think in terms of Thomas Edison, when people said, why did you keep working on the light bulb? You've already failed, quote, failed 1,000 times. He says, that just means I've tried something 1,000 times and I haven't found what works. Many of you are going to say something, you're going to have people look at you or raise an eyebrow, and you're going to quit and never say anything again. You start being like Thomas Edison, recognize the fact that people are going to not like what you have to say. They're going to make fun of you, but until the day comes in which, what you say is the one that just makes everything right, they're not going to remember the other stuff. They'll still probably make fun of you anyway. So just keep trying. So in other words, recognize the fact that it doesn't really matter what other people think. What matters really is how you feel and that you're getting your ideas out and you're expressing yourself. Because that's really what's going to stay with you, because you're the only one who's going to stay with those ideas. You're going to live in your own head for the rest of your life. You're not paying attention to the rest of them. Okay? Does this make sense? Can you begin to see why worrying about what other people think aren't really a great idea? So that's why Mel Robbins, I think, is phrasing it the way she did, is allow them to say those negative things, because in a sense, once you give permission, it allows you to recognize the fact that they're just not being mean and nasty. I will let them have their thoughts and they can go on and do whatever they want. In a sense of, I'll let them eat whatever they want, assuming, of course, that they're all adults. If they're children or something like that and they want a bunch of sugar, no. But I mean, assuming that they're adults and they've got their own, lives, you're allowing them to do that because you're not trying to, force themselves to do anything. So what's the difference with what they think? You'll feel better. And over time, they'll probably feel better too. Okay? It's got a little longer than I expected, but hopefully it made sense. Let me know what you think. If it makes sense, if you agree, disagree, and just tell me whether this was where you were expecting me to go or not. I'd really appreciate thoughts. I'm curious about that. So I hope you have a good week and we will chat with you later. Give some thought to what I had to say today, okay? Bye.